Welcome to Schmidt List, a podcast on innovation, creativity, and entrepreneurship. Join host Kurt Schmidt, president of Foundry, as he and his guest share valuable insights and strategies. This is the perfect opportunity to explore fresh ideas to improve yourself and your business. Come join Kurt as he interviews this week's inspiring guest.
Hey everyone, before we jump into the show, I just wanted to share this important message with all of you. As an agency leader, it likely often crosses your mind. Out of the million things I could be doing, what should I be focused on right now? When you're busy putting out daily fires, you easily get sucked into the weeds. And when the work lightens up, you're scrambling to find the projects to keep your team billable. But why enter 2024 just hoping that you'll thrive? On November 8th, Parallax is hosting a webinar featuring founder and CEO Tom O'Neill. Having built and scaled The Nerdery, a digital software agency, to 500 employees and $85 million in revenue, Tom is sharing practical habits to give you the focus and confidence to crush it in the year to come. I've had the pleasure of working with Tom in the past, and with his extensive background in agency scaling, he possesses the unparalleled expertise and experience to teach and guide others. So I strongly suggest you don't miss this webinar. Learn more and sign up for the free webinar at getparallax.com or via the link below in the show notes. And now, back to the show. Mike, how are you today?
I'm doing great. Great to see you, Kurt.
Good to see you. So, Mike, tell me about the work you do. Give me a little background and what you're doing these days.
Sure. It's great. It's great to be here. I work with Anderson Windows. I've been with Anderson Windows for 27 years. And for those of you that don't know, it's the largest window and door manufacturer in the United States by a mile, which is great. I'm also a writer on the side, just like you, I could. So hopefully that'll be something we'll talk about as well. My specialty at Anderson is really focused on infrastructure and operations and security. And security is what actually brought me to Anderson 27 years ago to help them build their security practice. And it has stuck with me the entire time I've been here for 27 years because I have a tremendous passion for it. And it's an area that, I find it very interesting and intriguing, and it never ends in terms of the amount of change that is going on in that industry. So,
well, I believe it. Well, and security is kind of like air. You don't know how much you enjoy it till you don't have it, right? Well, especially when it comes to data and security. It's a difficult business to be in. I can imagine sometimes I'm not saying anything about Anderson, but I know people in the security business that it can feel like a thankless job sometimes because again, like people don't really pay attention to it till they need it. Has that been your kind of history with it?
Right. And it is exactly the case. Yeah, I would say it's probably the one area that you can count on it changing every week.
Right.
Where you have to really just watch what's going on in the industry and make sure that your company is ready and prepared for it. What's really nice today is everybody understands security and the importance of it, thanks to all the stories that have been told, horrible stories, by the way, of getting breached and those sorts of things. So nobody wants to be that person that clicked the link or had the one system that had a security event. So my job's getting a little bit easier in that regard.
Yeah. And as I've learned from security mentors that I've had in the past, fantastic people I would work with, it's like 80% education, right?
Yes, it absolutely is. And 80% the human. There's a funny cartoon I've seen where it has a boxing ring. And on one end of the ring, it's like, we have firewalls and all this monitoring and detection software. And then in the corner fighting this is a guy named Dave. And on his shirt, it says user error. So you have to always make sure that you account for the human.
So that's amazing, Mike. I love that. I love that picture in my mind because I live it. But speaking of living it, so as you mentioned, you've been doing this for 27 years. There's been a lot of disruption over the years. Two-part question. So what in the last 27 years in your experience has been the most disruptive? Has it been cloud-based architecture? What things, and then how would you rate the AI and what's coming with AI on that scale of disruption?
Well, you really called out the two biggest megatrend, I think, in terms of completely turning our infrastructure and operations organization upside down, as well as our company. The advent of cloud, within my organization in 2016, 16% of our applications were in the cloud. And now more than 2/3 of our applications are in the cloud. So we've had to really think about how do we get ahead of that curve and make sure that we build the right practices within our organization to embrace it? All too often, we like to resist change. And in this case, you kind of have to get ahead of it. You have to be ready for it. And so one of our key strategies is under the banner of what we would call cloud-centric. So think of cloud applications as not the exception, but the rule. Having a system, a data center, is actually the exception. So how do you transform your infrastructure to really be cloud-centric first? And then really treat the data center as kind of, me and you, our grandfather's kind of technology, right? That's kind of what it is today. So that has been, I would say, a tremendous disruptive for the last 4, 5, or 6 years. But right now we are standing in the middle of what I would call probably one of the most exciting shifts in the industry with what I would call generative AI. AI, unfortunately, has been a marketing term. Whenever you go to any kind of event or show, we have all these vendors hawking their wares, they put AI in everything. But generative AI, when that came out over the last 3 or 4 years, I think people didn't quite know what to make of it until we applied it to our personal lives. And so now it's just so funny. We have all these opportunities in front of us and where do we start? Where do we place our bet? Because we know every bet's going to be a big one. And so I think a lot of it is more education and teaching people what to do and what not to do. And then really prioritizing and really trying to place your biggest bets on how is this going to change the game in terms of our customers and how we sell windows. And we're trying to stay customer-centric with the disruption because there's so many opportunities internal where I can write code faster. Those are all great, but that should be secondary to changing the game in the market.
Yeah, back to what you were just saying, the more customer-centric approach, because 20 years ago, I remember it was operational excellence was number one and customers were kind of number two. I mean, you didn't really say it out loud, but that's kind of how it was, right? It's like, if we can make the machine hum, the customers will be happy, right? And it's really flipped on its head a lot. And a lot of the work my company does in user experience side of things has shown how much importance people have to place on that. You get one shot with that customer to impress them and make them feel as if
Right.
you're taking care of them. And I can imagine you've seen a lot of that disruption over the time that you've been doing this.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And what's interesting with our company, Anderson Windows, our brand is built on trust. We're a company that have been around for more than 100 years. And so if someone has a problem with their window, they know we're going to be here. We're going to be able to solve their problem. Whereas a lot of window companies, there's thousands of them, you don't know if they're going to be there in 10 years.
Yeah.
Well, this disruption is so important because we have to make sure we don't breach that trust that we have with our customers. Because there's a lot of, I think you might have saw in the news, was it Tom Hanks that had to push something in media, social media saying, you saw that commercial about insurance? That wasn't really me. And I don't know if you had a chance to see that, but we're really about how that's going to impact trust. I don't know if you've had other customers talk about that.
Yeah, absolutely. The whole idea of guilty by association sometimes in an industry, right? Well, we experience it in my industry where we're doing development work, right? And if you work with an outside developer team and they do a poor job, you kind of assume that that's how they're all going to operate, right? And so you kind of lose trust in that sort of approach. So we put a very specific focus on customer experience, customer onboarding, and all those things to make sure that they understand that this is not whatever you experience is not the norm. This is the norm. This is how you should experience it, right? But that's the thing is that, and I've talked to people in lots of larger organizations like Anderson Windows, for example, and where you have security people, but you have to balance the idea of productivity and security don't necessarily blend very well together. How have you walked that balance, Mike, over the years?
That is such a great question. I'm so glad you asked it because I have always kind of viewed security as an enabler to move fast. And what I mean by that is if you think about it up front and get the right people involved and come to an agreement on the guidelines and how you want to operate with security and other things kind of figured out in advance, then you're kind of free to play. You're free to go and try all kinds of different things and have to seek approval throughout the life cycle of a product or something that you're developing. Get all that sorted out up front, and then it gives you a lot of freedom. I think where we get into trouble is like, well, let's do something for a while, then let's go figure out if we meet our infrastructure standards, or let's go figure out if we meet our security standards. All you're going to do is throw gum in that gear. You're going to slow it down, and people are going to get upset with each other and those sorts of things. Figure it out up front. And I think security owns this challenge just as much as our development team in being very thoughtful and proactive about what are the guidelines? What are the guardrails? Let us drive in the highway, but give us some guardrails so that people know that they should feel good about driving on the highway and that it's safe. So security needs to be a little more proactive in helping understand that. And then people can go nuts, right? Go as fast as.
I think that's fantastic because a lot of the companies I've worked with over the years, companies I've been a part of, consultancies where we've come in and helped companies do some agile transformations, right? Where they want to be more iterative, more customer-centric. But it does start with these sort of cornerstone pieces like procurement, finance, security, IT, these areas that have typically in the history have built brick walls around themselves to protect these very sensitive areas of the business and have made it unassailable on purpose because you don't want people from the outside assailing these things. But what you inadvertently do is making it so people internally can't as well move easier. So, in that sort of transformation, in that disruption, people always think about the tech side of things, but there's a broader change that has to happen in organizations. Is that what you've experienced as well?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, we've always talked about disruption, or at least at our company. I don't know if this is a similar definition that you had. It's kind of the merging of technology with process or the merging of technology with product. And having those two things come together is really what causes that disruption. Movies and the internet, Netflix, right? I mean, those are all obvious things.
Sure.
But because you're merging process with technology, that means the process is changing, just as disruptive as it is for the technology side. And so there's a lot of, kind of business operational process thinking in terms of, if we were to operate this new way, what does that mean to our organization? What does that mean in terms of how we approach our customers and how we interact with our customers? How much do we ask of our customers in order to give them information? There's a trust thing. Do we really need their phone number, address, name in order to give them a quote or be able to give them? So there's that tension kind of emerging in the industry is how do we allow people to be anonymous, but still have marketing leads and all those things that you need, things that you need. I think Apple is a great example of, I'm going to protect your privacy. I'm not going to resell your information, but I am going to change the game. And I need you to want to do this with me versus other companies that I won't name that it's kind of like, well, data is just a given. I get to take your data to kind of with that. So we're seeing disruption, in the Windows industry. I don't know if you've ever installed a window in a house, but it's a terrifying experience.
Yeah.
You're ripping a hole out and you have to go order a window. Not only need to know what kind of window you want, but how thick is your wall? How deep of an extension jam do you want? What the heck is an extension jam? Do you want things mowed together? Different window products are not mowed. Nobody knows what the heck any of that means, which is why they get a contractor. So that's a great area for us to find disruption, where it's really difficult for the customer to understand something. How do you simplify that? So I get a window and I want the window to look like this. You sweat the details.
Yeah. I think that's one reason why Best Buy has turned around quite a bit over the years is they've done a bigger focus on that education piece and making people feel more comfortable with technology. And I think that's a huge boon for them because years and years ago, people were, they were digging a grave for Best Buy with Amazon and Walmart and these other things tearing through. And they've come out and survived pretty well. And I think back to your point, I 100% put it on a more customer-centric approach to what they were doing. And so I see this, though, even in really highly regulated areas. So we work in the healthcare sector quite a bit and insurance. And to your point, when people are signing up for life insurance or to get a quote on life insurance, they want a lot of information from you to be able to give you that quote. And a lot of people are bowing out before they even finish the form. And they're kind of stuck because their regulatory is saying you have to get this information. Otherwise you cannot give them this thing. So they're just being told, just make it work. And they're like, no, it doesn't work this way anymore. People, especially people in their 20s and 30s who might be just dabbling right now in the idea of life insurance, right? It's not a priority for them. they're not going to fill out a 16-page form and submit a blood sample to get a quote. Like that's not how anything else works, right? So I totally am on par with what you're saying about how you've really got to work with the business in a way to, because again, I think you kind of were leaning towards this, Mike, is if you can't disrupt yourself, you can't disrupt an industry, right?
Right. I just had an example that, came up as you think about how we build trust as human beings between each other. We start a conversation.
Mm-hmm.
I learn about you, you learn about me, and then over time, as we share information, we build our trust. It's no different in technology. How do you start a conversation? Oh, you're interested in insurance. You might want to learn more about insurance. Let's just start the conversation. I probably have a better chance of sinking that hook and keeping you into the conversation because I'm going to build that trust instead of expecting it up front. And I think the companies that have figured that piece out are going to find that they're going to have a really kind journey. Yeah.
I totally agree with that. Okay. Another, I want to dive into AI just a little bit because I've been seeing a lot more startups that are coming to disrupt the disruptors because you've got ChatGPT, you've got Microsoft, you've got a lot of folks, Google playing in the AI space. But as we've seen, they've scraped a lot of content that they probably shouldn't have in order to teach their language models. And so I'm seeing more and more startups that are trying to boast that they have legit models, right? So if you look at Adobe right now, they have their Firefly, which is all trained on images and licensed images that people have been paid for or they've purchased or things like that. So when a company like yours is interested in AI, obviously the whole idea of, I'm just going to use the simplest way I could think of, is that you've got a marketing person who needs to write some quick copy for a window posting, and they go use ChatGPT and they come back and they dump it in. And then we find out later, like it plagiarized some things from 16 other Windows companies or something. So that's stuff that you've got, obviously. How are you, and what's your advice for people that are also in a similar situation? How are you viewing this? Because again, like you said, you don't want to slow down progress, but you need to pump the brakes a little bit, right? So what's your advice there?
Yeah. We kind of had to tackle two things. And I think, first of all, it's kind of the recognition that we don't know quite where this is going to go. I do kind of have this sense that we're going to have some IP lawsuits, some big ones. And, and it's going to really define kind of what's okay and what's not okay in the industry. So not knowing that, what do we do as a company, right? Well, the first thing that we talked about at least was, let's establish a policy. Let's really kind of agree across our leadership within Anderson as to what is acceptable AI use and not. And one of those is exactly what you described. We are not going to leverage other people's IP. That's against our values. And so we've stated that. We put that in the policy. And that will stand the test of time. Now, if we use a third party's generative AI solution and they happen to be sued because they use somebody's IP, at least when they look at Anderson, we'll say, well, we selected vendors because they said they wouldn't use other people's IP.
Right. We signed agreements.
To be confident and say, just because we don't know where this is going, I'm sure a couple of lawsuits will happen and then things will get sorted out. And then we've made the internal statement that we're going to be very thoughtful and purposeful about making sure we only use our own IP. We're also worried about our IP going out to the industry. If you think about Anderson being number one in the industry by a mile, the last thing we want is our competition to be able to get our intellectual property and be able to be a small window company and get the power of a large company by being able to take some of that knowledge. So we're also worried about that information going out. Most people, I think, are wary about making sure they keep their data internal. But the intellectual property question is a very good one.
Yeah, that's the thing is I kind of view this time, and you can correct me, Mike, but my general metaphor is to people less in the know has been, this is kind of, ChatGPT feels like the Napster of the moment, and then there's a Spotify coming at some point that kind of legitimizes a lot of this, because it does feel, like you said, it feels a little rogue. They, Sam Altman and them are like, well, so what? Like, it's out there. It's on the internet. You can read it. We just read it really fast and stored it all, like they're just kind of flippant about it. Right. Whereas the same thing is if you look at, Sean Parker with Napster was like, I'm not doing anything. I'm just facilitating people sharing music to each other. I don't actually store any of the data or anything. Right. So there seems to be, but again, whether or not how these people are doing this, they have identified a problem that people have and they are solving it. So that part is not going to go away, right? People do need help with their resumes. People do need help with writing content, and they do need help with ideas that are tailored to their specific needs versus how it might be spoon-fed from a specific website or something, right? Again, back to I love the analogy of the recipe website, right? Is that the best place to hide a dead body is where the actual ingredients list is, because you can never find it. But again, this is part of the way they've solved a problem, which is that Google will rank their recipes higher if there's a lot of content and context around the recipe. And so what they've done is they've created these huge long stories of their grandma and, Sundays, Sunday gravy and blah, blah, blah. And then there's like this little blurb of the recipes. And there's even apps out there now that have figured out a way to scrape those things. So it's this whole ecosystem that's been created because of SEO, right? For example. So what I see happening with AI is that people can cut through and just say, give me the recipe for this. And it just pulls it up instead of having to go and hopefully Google pulls you up the right information. Hopefully it's not something that people have paid to play sort of stuff, right? It feels a little bit like you could be in more control there. But as we've been talking about, there is a dark side to that as well, because you don't know exactly where that information came from. And does that person receive compensation on that IP for you doing that work? And so, like you said, as a company, first of all, there's the legal aspect, but there's the moral and the values that your company relies on to do the work that it does. It can be in conflict with, right?
Right. And that's actually the very first section of our AI policy is you will adhere to our business code of conduct.
Mm-hmm.
So trying to remind everyone that as we're using these capabilities, we got to remember our values as a company and what's expected of us as employees. It doesn't go out the window because we're using AI. We have to be very mindful of all these policies that exist in our company are still relevant. It's just another tool, another technology, and we need to be mindful of it. But you speak a lot to kind of that bias. I think hallucinations is kind of a fun word. People, the best one I've heard is confabulation, because it's not really a hallucination, but it's a confabulation. Try saying that 14 times.
It's a great word, yeah.
How do you make sure, that you review the content of the AI query to make sure that it doesn't have that bias and that it doesn't have that confabulation? And that's kind of what we have in our policy is make sure that you declare you used AI and then declare what data you may have used in the model and who reviewed it. Just put that in as kind of a little signature on a slide or at the end of the Word doc so that people kind of remember, this is how it was used and for what purpose.
Right. And again, back to your point about education, the more we call out in an organization when and where we're using it, it just sort of seeps into the culture too. As more people see that presentation that salesperson put together or something, they see those bylines like you're talking about, and it's a constant reminder to people to like check themselves when they're using those sorts of tools. So I think that's super smart, Mike. Well, speaking of content, I do want to talk a little bit about your book series too, because I think AI plays a lot into people writing books these days. So tell me about your history with authorship. Where did it start, and what gave you the bug?
So everybody asks that question. That's a great question. It's more I started out as actually a nonfiction writer. For whatever reason, I can't explain it. I love project management and getting things organized. So I wrote all kinds of articles for PM Network and different kind of disciplinary magazines, as well as a discipline-based magazine. It's the same thing when it comes to cybersecurity. It's been a big passion of mine for so long that I've written a lot of nonfiction. And then I got caught on a long flight. I can't remember. It was probably to England. And I started making up stories of all the different people sitting around me in the plane, just for fun, right? And then I was like, I should write some of this stuff down, right? And I started to write a few short stories. I have a few authors that I'm just passionate about. Started to emulate their style. And really, at that point, shared some of their stories with my family and left it at that. Years later, I had an author move on my leg. And we ended up hitting it off as a friendship. And she's a New York Times bestselling author. She's from Minnesota. She's part of the PJ Tracy author series as a mother and daughter writing team. And they wrote Monkey Wrench, which is a very famous mystery from the Twin Cities area. And she read some of my stuff and said, "Are you kidding me, Mike? You should try getting published." And so people always say this. I don't know if you've heard this, Kurt, but write what you know, because then it makes you go through the writing. And so I decided to write my first story around a poor individual suffering the worst of all kinds of cybersecurity event, having their personal identity deleted in every way, shape, and form. And so that was actually the subject of the first book.
Yeah, that's great. And so, you've continued on with the writing, I'm sure, and that's going to be something I want to ask you, because I get a lot of people that ask myself, and I want to get your advice, is how do you balance work, life, writing? How do you find the time to write? Because that's usually probably the second question I get from people is, how did you find the time to write a book?
I want to hear your answer after I give mine. It's hard. It's hard. You have to be disciplined, right? Oh, it's different for every individual, but for me specifically, what I do is every Saturday and Sunday morning, I get up like I'm getting up for work. I'm an early bird. I'm always up by 5:15. And instead of going to work, which is my day job, I actually come down into this room and I sit on the couch and I write all morning. And so for 2 days a week, I'm writing maybe 4 to 5 hours, which is about 10 hours a week. And by the time 10 o'clock rolls around and I go upstairs, when my kids were here, they're now grown up, they'd be just waking up. My wife would have been working on something else and they didn't even know I was down here working. And so that discipline of every weekend, making sure I get that done, has really worked out well. What's really fast for me is I have a piece of software that tracks behind the scenes how long it's taking me to write. And the first book took 52 hours, cumulative. Wow. Not duration, just how much time did I sit at the computer and write between the time I turned it off. And if you think about that, what is that? How many weekends is that? 25 weekends.
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah, myself, it is just like you. It's all about systems. It's about building systems that keep me honest and in check, right? And honestly, about over half of my book was probably spoken and then transcribed. So I did, just like yourself, I would do that occasion. I'm on long drives to clients and on planes and different things like that. And basically, I just pull up my Apple voice recorder and I would just record something that was interesting to me, something I was thinking about. Maybe I just walked out of a client meeting and they were talking about the importance of this or that, the other thing. And then I would just talk into my recorder as if I was continuing the meeting in a way, right? Or maybe having a follow-up to that meeting and I would just record that. And then I would take all those and I just leave it. And then over the course of a couple months, when I'd have maybe a free Saturday or Sunday like yourself, I'd take all those files off, dump them into a transcription service. It would spit back out the transcription. And then I would just go through it like it was clay. And I would be just pulling out pieces and then organizing it. And then I'd do all the organization and then I'd leave that sit for a while. And then I would come back with fresh eyes and then I'd be like, all right, what's this mess? And then I would just start to type and sort through all of those things. Because I have I'm very challenged with the idea of a white piece of document, paper, or whatever sitting in front of me and trying to create on it. So I use the voice stuff as kind of as clay to start to build my sculpture. And that worked out really well for me. But it's still, I don't think it was any faster doing it that way. I think it was just different. So it still takes a long time.
Right. I think there's an element of challenge to trying to maintain that level of creativity because you can't just turn on the muse or it. And I've struggled with, it's Saturday morning and I don't want to write. I don't have that inspiration that kind of getting me going. So I had to kind of teach myself when I finish Sunday morning and I know I got 5 days ahead of me before I start writing again. I kind of leave myself in my writing at a point where I'm not quite sure where the story is going to go, what the characters are going to do. And then what I do Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday is I think about it in the shower when I'm running, when I'm driving to work and I'm like, oh, Jenny would do, oh my gosh, this is how Mike would respond. So by the time I get to Saturday morning, I'm like, oh, I can't wait to just get it out of my system and get it down to paper. So, but it took me probably 2 or 3 years to kind of figure out how to build a discipline around the muse. It's really hard for me.
I love that you brought that up because I think people assume like, I got to be good right out the gate, right? I've got to know what to do right out the gate. And one of the best books I ever read was the Stephen King's On Writing book. And I suggest that to everybody who's thinking about writing. Yeah. It's a fantastic book because, I mean, he basically talks about like, you got to push through like it's just like a marathon runner. All your muscles in your body are going to be screaming at you to stop and telling you that this isn't a good idea, that you don't know what you're doing, and you've got to be able to push through. But once you do, it's like an oasis that you run into and you're like, oh, this has always been here. And you needed to go through that sort of muscle memory and training to be able to access that creative oasis that you do have. And I love that you kind of mention the whole process of like writer's block or whatever the case may be, right? Everybody experiences it just on different levels, right?
Right. That Stephen King book is a fantastic book because I think it gives you courage to write and to try it out. And the thing I learned from it was expect rewrites after rewrites.
Right.
In fact, invest more time on the rewriting process than the actual writing of the first edition. I think if you go in with that attitude, then it frees you to just write. Just get it out because you know you're going to come back and revisit that sentence 18 more times. You're going to be so sick of it. You just want to get it published, right? But it does allow you to just get it all out. And then you kind of see the bones of what story you're trying to tell or kind of what business ideas you're trying to convey as it is on your side of the world. Mm-hmm. And then you start to kind of tighten it up. And that's where the editors come in and they really help you find kind of that tight story that really gets people's attention.
Yeah, well, I'm a big fan of your writings. I've been reading the books, and I really suggest them for anybody listening to go and check out. They're a lot of fun. I when I'm watching them, I kind of envision like an Amazon Prime series being built off of these. It's really, I think it'd be perfect for it. So I'm excited for when that happens, Mike. And then I'll tell everybody that you're on the podcast, and nobody will believe me. So, but I've got the recording today. So Mike, if I do want to get in touch with you, if I want to learn more about the books you're doing and where to find that information, where are great places to get a hold of you?
Yeah, so I think the best thing is to go to the Facebook page and just look up MT Clark. It's not Mike Clark. Apparently there's 999 Mike Clarks in the world, so don't look that up. So I went with an old nickname, MT. My middle name is Timothy, so MT Clark is the author name, and you can go on Facebook and find my author page. There's also, you can go to the publisher, which is shavedogllc.com, and you can see what's new there. The third book will be coming out in October to wrap up the series, as I think it is. I'm ready to write on some new stuff, but the demand is there. Sometimes people say stick with the series, so we'll see how that goes.
I will see how it goes. Well, for those of you listening, we will have links in the description to go and check that out. I strongly suggest if you're looking for some good nonfiction or some good fiction that is kind of, I don't know, it's got a good thrilling sort of aspect, lots of nice drama, good dialogue. I think it's just and they're great reads. So I'm really glad that you took the plunge, Mike, and moved forward with it. So thank you again for taking the time to join me today. We'll have you back on the show when the next AI revolution happens and get your insights.
I look forward to it. It's always a pleasure to spend time with you, Kurt.
We appreciate you taking the time to listen to this episode of Schmidt List. The stories shared by our guests are genuinely inspiring and offer insightful knowledge. It's important to remember that success doesn't happen overnight and requires collaboration, learning, and perseverance. If you want to broaden your professional connections, check out Kurt's book, The Little Book of Networking, How to Build Your Career One Conversation at a Time on Amazon. Please stay connected with all things Schmidt List on social media, leave a review for the podcast, and join our community of like-minded entrepreneurs. Thank you for being part of Schmidt List. Keep innovating, collaborating, and chasing your entrepreneurial dreams.